Fred, I can promise at least I have warm greetings from Zambia. You know, with a name like Stu, I'm kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum from Freddie in terms of long names. But my mum is from Wales. And in Wales, there's a very, very small town that has a very, very long name. And my uncle used to sit me on his knee and force me to memorize as part of my Welsh heritage. Llan Vair Pwll Gwyngyll Fo Gogeric Frindrobo Llan Dysilio Go Go Go. Just trips off the tongue, just like that. Now, you know, one of the privileges of being the opening speaker is that I get to stand up here and maybe pose a few questions for us to think about, but I'm under no obligation to actually answer those questions. And looking around the room, I can see that you are also far more qualified than I am to ruminate on those and reflect on them. But over the last 20 years or so that I've been working in the international development field, I've noted a few trends that I just thought I would bring up in terms of things that are changing and what are the implications for development and what are the implications for public engagement. So, je voudrais souligner quelques tendances avec des implications pour l'engagement de la public. Chaque tendance pose des questions, mais je ne suis pas obligé de trouver des réponses. C'est à vous de réfléchir et de discuter pendant la conférence. Il y a 4 réalités que je voudrais discuter. Première, c'est la convergence géographique. Les frontières sont maintenant économiques et pas géographiques. Plus à plus, les frontières divisent nos communautés. Deuxième, c'est la convergence de business et mission sociale. Plus à plus, on trouve les entreprises avec une mission sociale et les organismes sociaux avec une stratégie de business. Troisième, c'est la convergence des secteurs économiques, social, environnemental. Et finalement, le devoir de démontrer l'impact des programmes sociaux. Les bailleurs demandent plus d'évidence pour les résultats, mais que sont des implications pour l'engagement public? So let's start by looking at geographic convergence. Now, despite some efforts south of the border to turn back the hands of time a little bit, we do live in an increasingly globalized world. So more and more, we, I think, see the demise of what we used to refer to as the third world, as a geographic reality. But we see the emergence of a third world as a localized economic situation. Some of you may have seen TED Talks by the late Hans Rosling, who did a fantastic job with data visualizations and demonstrating changes over time in some of the realities that we see. And one of the most powerful was to look at the changing reality geographically when you look at Africa, Asia, some of the countries that we typically had in that basket of third world. And over time, that convergence as they start to overlap. And we start to see those lines economically being drawn within our communities rather than between geographic zones. As part of that, we see a fast emerging middle class in parts of Africa, large swaths of Asia. Increasingly, we have a young, educated, connected person in Lahore or in Lusaka actually has more in common with a similar person in LA than they do necessarily with an illiterate laborer living just down the road. Along with this trend, we have the rise of social media, which is giving previously marginalized voices more of a platform to share their own experience, rather than having maybe development organizations or others acting as privileged intermediaries in the telling of stories, successes, and struggles. We see this both internationally and domestically, as we also increasingly hear indigenous voices more audibly telling their own stories. So this all raises some interesting questions for the role and approach of public engagement. Who is engaging who? Which voices continue to be marginalized, even as we see more voices coming to the fore? What is the role of organizations like ours in amplifying these voices? Where are those borders and those fault lines that run through our own society? It's no longer a story of us over here and them over there, but rather we see the challenges of solitudes within our own communities, haves and have-nots, urban and rural, men and women, the list goes on. Like I said, I'm under no obligation to provide any answers to these questions. I think a second relevant trend is the convergence of business and social mission. So when iDE, the organization that I work for, started 35 years ago, the concept of promoting business opportunities as a way of addressing poverty was somewhat revolutionary at the time, and also anathema to most organizations. But today, with the proliferation of social enterprise, including the creation of a whole class of B corporations that adopt a triple bottom line of financial, environmental, and social. We see many individuals and groups with a social mission also adopting business as a sustainable and scalable means of achieving social goals. On the other side, we see many companies adopting social mission. Now, there's a range of motivations, ranging all the way from sort of more cynical PR plays to really genuine commitments to doing well by doing good. We see smart, young business graduates turning down lucrative Bay Street or Wall Street appointments for the opportunity to work on hard problems with tangible social value. Our global water and sanitation director at iDE is a Harvard grad who, while their friends were taking six-figure jobs with Wall Street firms, came to work for us for pennies in Cambodia, but with the joy and the challenge of creating viable businesses serving rural populations with affordable toilets. So from a public engagement perspective, I think this means there's an expanded field of action. One does not need to be working for a nonprofit to be a social entrepreneur. And also, we see increasingly our purchase and investment decisions being a whole area of action. Now, I can't speak about this, and especially with Zach Gross in the room, without talking about free trade, fair trade, and the whole fair trade movement. And I think it's an interesting one in the sense that I've had the opportunity to tour a coffee supply chain in Nicaragua, where we have some work, and met with co-ops who are selling into the fair trade market. And I think it's been a fascinating journey in terms of using business opportunities, market opportunities as a way of driving social change, creating more equitable markets, fairer markets. But I've also observed another dynamic in also not just touring the co-ops who are selling into the fair trade market, but also touring the major processors who are selling to the Starbucks and the Nestle's and others. And there's been incredible changes actually in those supply chains. We see things like the chain of custody. Groups like Rainforest Alliance have worked with those companies so that they can trace a coffee all the way from the field to when it's as dried green coffee waiting to get on a ship to go to New York. And I've walked through a warehouse where you can look at the tag and you can get information on the biodiversity on the farm, social conditions on the farm. This has now become increasingly important, at least in this particular supply chain, and I credit the fair trade movement for a lot of that. I see it as an indirect effect. So we have sort of the direct effect of fair trade's market share, but also the indirect effect of the pressures that it puts on these supply chains and on the companies operating them, knowing that people are now looking, they're paying attention, and what difference that makes for the environmental and social realities within those supply chains. So how does public engagement adapt to these realities, helping people to navigate the complex set of choices around purchasing behavior and discerning empty PR from what's really genuine impact? Once again, under no obligation to provide an answer to that question. I think a third convergence that we see is convergence of social, economic, and environmental goals. Now, I'm not saying anything really dramatic or revolutionary here, but I think when we work in international development, it takes us really to the front lines of climate change. For a smallholder farmer in Burkina Faso or the Mekong Delta, climate change is a current reality, and the direct links between environmental issues, poverty, food insecurity are readily apparent. You don't have to have a doctoral degree to see it. We can tell the stories of individuals experiencing this interplay of the environmental, social, and economic pressures. Canada's new Feminist International Assistance Policy reflects some of this intersectionality of issues. There's a strong climate theme that runs through it. And of course, the name of the policy itself makes a bold statement about the centrality of advancing empowerment of women and girls, an undertaking that cuts across areas of trade, foreign affairs, environment, etc. Now, of course, as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So the challenge is on the table. But the solutions are far from simple. One of the things we work with a lot is small-scale drip irrigation systems. They significantly improve the water efficiency of production. So you can get the same amount of crop with a lot less water. And a lot of people would look at that and say, well, therefore that's going to reduce pressures on water resources. Unfortunately, we see that's often not the case. When a farmer has their hands on a technology that greatly improves water efficiency, their response is not so much to cut back on water consumption, but rather to increase their production, which of course is vital for their own productivity, their own income. So the reality of these intersecting and sometimes competing environmental, social, and economic concerns can be daunting for public engagement. Simple stories can be compelling, and simple actions, click here, are attractive, but are they effective? And effectiveness is the crux of my fourth trend. So organizations are under increasing pressure to measure and to demonstrate impact. Now, as somebody who's made a career out of that, it warms my heart to say that. It is an area of personal passion for me, which a lot of people just look at me very quizzically and think, you're a complete nerd, which I am. I did lead our global evaluation team for several years at iDE, and we've used a variety of methods, from qualitative deep dives to randomized control trials, to try and answer the question of whether we're making any difference. There's organizations out there, such as GuideStar, GiveWell, others, that have popped up to offer guidance to donors making decisions on international development efforts. There's rigorous evaluation outfits, such as 3IE, Innovations for Poverty Action, the Jamil Latif Poverty Action Lab at MIT, which have also expanded rapidly in recent years. With this focus on measuring impact, measuring results, I can see two key questions from a public engagement perspective. One is, how do we communicate results in a way that's engaging and meaningful? So Dean Carlin, who's the founder of Innovations for Poverty Action, published a paper that asked whether reporting evidence from rigorous evaluations improved response from donors. So this study used a randomized design itself to report either an engaging story or a story plus evidence from evaluations. So you had some people were randomized into just receiving a nice story, and other people were randomized into receiving the story, plus here's a few lines on results from a randomized control trial that we've conducted that gives some really strong evidence for the effectiveness of the program. So guess which one was more effective at achieving donor response? Well, they found no difference between the two. But the interesting thing was, when they started to dig down into the data and they actually separated out the sample, they found that there was two groups. People who had given very little money and tended to give like small amounts to a whole bunch of organizations actually decreased their giving as a result of receiving the randomized control results. Whereas another group who gave larger amounts and mainly concentrated to fewer organizations gave more. So what they theorized was that you had a group of people who were actually committed to the results, which they called sort of an altruistic effect. So they actually wanted to see results. Those people responded favorably to seeing evidence of impact. The other group they termed the warm glow group. So they got just a nice feeling from giving and being involved with a wide range of organizations, regardless of what the impact was. And they theorized that there, providing the data actually kind of took a bit of the glow off the nice story. And perhaps even introduced some uncertainty, because when we're really honest about our evaluations, you always have to talk about uncertainty in your results. And this may have created just a seed of doubt that that warm glow kind of ebbed just a little bit. And so I think this has some implications for us in public engagement. We're not necessarily just doing fundraising, but I think when we're looking at engagement of people, we may see a similar set of groups. And I know for us, we've taken a strategy of really trying to focus in on that group initially that is a bit more committed to the results, has the passion for it, and then let's build ourselves out from there. The second question is, how do we actually evaluate the impact of public engagement efforts? Now, admittedly, it can be difficult to measure change in some of the variables we're trying to affect. Particularly in the area of policy, it's very difficult to attribute changes to any particular action. However, I believe that even the act of specifically trying to define our goals in measurable terms is actually a very valuable process. At least in our own experience, I know we've been guilty of generating a lot of heat and light without necessarily advancing a strategic goal. And forcing ourselves to clearly define the change we seek is tough, it's hard work, but it's an important step if we're to be focused and effective in the action that we take. So, en conclusion, on a identifié quelques questions pour l'engagement de la public. Comment amplifier les voix de communautés marginalisées dans un contexte de mondialisation où les frontières sont économiques et pas géographiques? Comment engager la public avec les opportunités et les défis du rôle de l'entreprise dans le train de développement? Comment agir pour les actions assez simples et compréhensibles par les complexités des enjeux sociaux, économiques et environnementaux? et comment mesurer et communiquer les résultats de nos efforts dans un sens compréhensible et engagé. So I wish you productive and useful discussions as you explore the opportunities and challenges for public engagement in a changing world. The potential and the need for meaningful public engagement has never been greater, even as the challenges become increasingly complex and dynamic. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak this morning. Miigwech, merci.